Hey there. Ever been dating someone or maybe just making a new friend and found yourself wondering about their attachment style? Like, could they be avoidant? Well, today we're going to dive into 10 key signs that are dead giveaways of someone being a dismissive avoidant attachment style. This will help you understand their behavior, how to approach them, and learn more about what they need or expect in a relationship. This way, you can figure out if this is a good fit for you. If you're new here, welcome to the Dark Psychology World channel. I'm Dave, and I post daily content about attachment, the subconscious mind, and how we can heal and rewire what's not working for us. But first, we focus on empowering our relationship with ourselves and understanding our relationships with others. Attachment styles are a hot topic in the relationship space, and I'd say there's nothing more important to our relationships than understanding our own attachment styles. They play a huge role in what we expect from relationships, how we give and receive love, and how we communicate our boundaries and expectations. I often compare attachment styles to playing a board game with different rules. If you're dating or in any kind of relationship with someone who has a different attachment style than you, they basically have different subconscious rules for love and connection. It's like one person playing Monopoly and the other playing Scrabble. You can imagine all the unnecessary arguments and friction that can cause. So, in this video, we're specifically going to tackle this issue. Let's get started. If you're new to the concept of attachment theory, I'm here to help you understand 10 key traits that might indicate you're a dismissive avoidant. This could be your primary attachment style, and we're going to dive into these features and discuss why they exist and where they come from. First off, if you're dismissive avoidant, you might find yourself really scared of being vulnerable. Even if you feel somewhat detached from your emotions and don't think you fear vulnerability, if you look closely, you'll see that you do a lot to avoid it. So, there's some subconscious fear there, even if you're not really in touch with the emotion of it. Generally, you might associate vulnerability with feeling helpless, weak, shameful, or unsafe if you're too open with others. These aren't things that vulnerability inherently is, but when we grow up in an environment where our needs are neglected, as is often the case for dismissive avoidance, it feels really bad to open up and be vulnerable. You might associate being open, sharing about yourself, and expressing your needs with negative outcomes you experienced as a child. You might have felt weak or been shamed for being vulnerable. Messages like, "Don't cry, be a big girl," or "Big boys don't cry," get programmed into us as concepts or ideas at a subconscious level that we interact with the world through. So, the first sign is that dismissive avoidants tend to be really scared of being vulnerable and will do all sorts of things to avoid it, especially as they get closer to people in relationships. The second sign is that you might find that you constantly escape into things as a strategy to avoid your feelings altogether. I found that dismissive avoidants generally have a hard time with this. Especially when I was working with couples, I noticed that as soon as things got too real or open, or tough conversations needed to happen, if anything triggered too strong of an emotional response for the dismissive avoidant partner, they would often try to escape. This wasn't necessarily a conscious decision to leave the room, but they would do things like get restless, move around, deflect, or steer the conversation in a different direction. I've heard many stories from partners of dismissive avoidance who said the same thing. A tough conversation would happen. Their partner would get restless, move away, escape into their phone. I've had countless conversations with dismissive avoidants who say things like, "I can't sleep without the TV on," or, "As soon as I get in the car, I turn up the radio right away." It's almost like they need constant stimulation. Based on my research into dismissive avoidance over the last decade, I truly believe that dismissive avoidants do this. Dismissive avoidants often use distraction as a subconscious strategy to avoid their own feelings and emotional state. This is usually because they have some sort of barrier or fear of feeling, which often goes back to how they were raised. If you grew up feeling neglected, and if that felt really bad, and if your needs were neglected when you were a child, there's a chronic feeling of unsafety that comes with that. Most dismissive avoidants will tell me that their childhood was wonderful. It's not that there wasn't stability. Many dismissive avoidants had food on the table, structure, a ride to school in the morning. But the emotional aspect of connection and relationships is what's often missing. We have different pillars of connection. We have mental or intellectual connection, where dismissive avoidants tend to feel quite safe. We have emotional connection, which dismissive avoidants usually have a strong element of neglect around in their upbringing. Then we have physical connection, which we often find dismissive avoidants also lacking, like parents giving them a hug or having some sort of healthy physical affection between parent and child. And then we have sexual connection, which obviously relates to our adult romantic relationships and can be affected by other pillars of emotional and physical connection. I often find that dismissive avoidants, because of that neglect triggering this chronic feeling of being unsafe, are often in this low-level fight or flight response. This has become a set point at a subconscious level, and that neglect growing up in childhood, even if it was just emotional neglect, often leads them to feel like they can't trust or rely on someone. Are their needs going to be met? Will they be okay? This leads to a subconscious comfort zone of regularly feeling unsafe and needing to escape that chronic feeling of unsafety that's lingering. I want to be clear about one other thing before I move on to point number 3. Dismissive avoidants can also find themselves in a position where they are overtly neglected. They can struggle with neglect as a whole. They can struggle with routines, food on the table. Their basic needs can be neglected. But I would say the vast majority of dismissive avoidants generally suffer more from that covert neglect under that emotional pillar of relating. More extreme dismissive avoidance, we can see a bigger theme of neglect that's overt, both with basic needs, physical needs, food, survival needs, and those emotional needs as a byproduct as well. So, number 3, and this really relates back to the I am unsafe core wound that a lot of dismissive avoidants have. They tend to really dislike conflict. It doesn't mean they'll never be in a conflict, but it does mean that generally, they will do what they can to deflect, avoid, shut down, withdraw from conflict as quickly and as easily as possible because of that I am unsafe core wound. So we may see, for example, that a dismissive avoidant in the middle of an argument will be like, okay, I'm sorry, I get it, and then later on will not really come back and, okay, I'll do that thing you asked me to do, and then won't necessarily follow through because sometimes they're in this fight or flight response mode where they're afraid of the conflict. Dismissive avoidants often find conflict really unsettling and uncomfortable. So, they'll usually just agree to things to escape the situation without really being fully present or involved in the conversation. This doesn't necessarily help resolve issues or contribute to the growth of the relationship they're in. I've seen dismissive avoidants deflect and avoid conflict, and they really don't like drama. They'll do what they can to avoid engaging in conflict or arguments. The 4th sign is that dismissive avoidants are way more sensitive to criticism than you might think. They often struggle with this core wound of feeling defective, like there's something inherently wrong with them. This belief usually stems from neglect in childhood. If there's a substantial amount of neglect in a particular or multiple pillars of connection and relationships, dismissive children, because our attachment style develops really young, can't understand that their parents might be emotionally unavailable or unstable. So, the child's mind personalizes everything. What happens is when their needs aren't being met, instead of seeing the lack of availability from the caregiver, they think, oh, there must be something wrong with me. I must be defective. Something must be wrong with me that I'm not getting my needs met. They have this deep subconscious program around that, and this leads to chronic self-shaming. If you're listening to this video and you think you might be a dismissive avoidant, I would really urge you to check in and ask yourself how much you shame yourself for little things. I've had countless conversations with dismissive avoidant clients over the years who have said things to me like, yeah, I got out of bed late. I wanted to get up at 8. I got up at 8:30. And I really was giving myself a hard time for the first hour of the morning. I didn't really identify it as shame, but now that we're talking about it, yeah, I really shamed myself. I really put myself down for it. And it really is this triggering feeling of like, oh, something's wrong with me. I'm just defective. I want to be really clear that these are just programs. Programs are not reality. They are just an idea you adopt and it gets embedded into the subconscious mind. The subconscious is programmed through repetition plus emotion. So, if you've repetitively had unmet needs and it elicits an emotional response of like, oh, it must be me, then the firing and wiring of that idea across time leads you to believe this about yourself. It doesn't mean it's the truth, but it's a belief, and it creates this filter, or I guess a lens would be a more appropriate term, that you see and interact with the world through. So, it's really valuable to learn to recondition some of these ideas by really questioning them, by really bringing them to your conscious mind's awareness, and being able to do so. Before we dive into number 5, if you're interested, you can check out our Dismissive Avoidant Reprogramming course for free for 7 days. We talk all about how to use tools to recondition the subconscious mind. You're not born with these programs. They're things that get wired into you over time through repetition and emotion, and you can recondition these things using similar principles to how they got conditioned into you in the first place. So, number 5, dismissive avoidants tend to have low emotional bandwidth at all times. They're sort of in a low-level deactivated state. In other words, they don't really feel like they can emotionally invest in other people. Why is this? Well, if you didn't learn how to fill your own emotional cup because there was no modeling in childhood to pour into your emotional cup and meet your needs, then you don't have much in your cup to pour into other people. If you combine that with these ideas that your emotions are unsafe, that part of you is shameful or bad or weak, these ideas that dismissive avoidants collect through conditioning, then what ends up happening is you get into a position where you don't feel like you can even go there. You can't even look at the cup, let alone pour into it, which translates into what people have to give for others. As cliché as it sounds, what we show up for in the relationship to ourselves is what we have an abundance of that we can then distribute to the relationships outside of ourselves. This goes for all things and all needs. For example, if preoccupied individuals have a lot of ability to meet their own emotional connection needs, then that translates into the emotional connection needs they have with others. So, all of these things really reflect how this individual treats themselves as well. Our next one is number 6. Dismissive avoidants often feel misunderstood. One of the most important things that I've learned over the years about dismissive avoidants is that they usually chronically feel misunderstood and struggle to even open themselves up. They kind of have this why bother concept around trying to express themselves. It's because they're not communicating their needs. We know that dismissive avoidants are often in relationships with people who have more emotions to give. We know that they're usually in relationships with fearful avoidants who are overgivers at times, or anxious preoccupied individuals who are also overgivers, or even securely attached people at times who have a lot more of that abundance to give. But that doesn't mean because you're with a giving partner that the giving partner can read your mind all the time. So, dismissive avoidants tend to feel misunderstood and feel like people are misinterpreting their actions or criticizing them for things that they aren't intending to do, or shaming them for things that they didn't mean to do. Largely, this problem gets solved when dismissive avoidants learn to communicate what their needs are, what their boundaries are, what their intentions were, why they did what they did. And in order to do that, dismissive avoidants have to first work through that fear of vulnerability. Dismissive avoidants often feel misunderstood and tend to shy away from communication. But what I really want to get across here is that communication could actually help you get your needs met and help you feel seen and understood in a healthy way. Let's say you're a dismissive avoidant dating an anxious preoccupied person. If you say to your partner, "Look, I really care about you and the relationship. I feel like we're in a great spot. My emotional bandwidth is used up this week. I'm tapped out and I really need Friday night just to spend time with myself to recharge. Then we'll hang out Saturday or I'll see you on Sunday." If you could give context and open up a bit, be transparent, it would actually help your partner understand that there isn't a problem, we're okay. It wouldn't trigger the partner's core wounds, and then your partner would have a much better time understanding and making space for your needs. But what often happens is dismissive avoidants just withdraw. They fear conflict, they want to cancel plans anytime they need time to themselves. They won't communicate with context and openness and transparency, and those things will be misread as, "Oh, you don't care. You didn't even care to show up." And really, a lot of the time, the dismissive avoidant feels kind of guilty but doesn't want to communicate, doesn't want the conflict, withdraws instead to avoid the whole thing. There's just a much easier way through opening up a bit more and communicating your why. Number 7. Dismissive avoidants tend to believe that everybody is responsible for themselves. Now, this is true to an extent. We are responsible for our own feelings, our own needs, our own boundaries. We do have to know these things about ourselves in order to communicate them with others so we can be seen and known and understood. However, what we often don't see is healthy interdependence. Interdependence is the middle ground between codependency, which leans towards the anxious side of the attachment spectrum, and hyperindependence or even counterdependency on the other side of the attachment spectrum. Healthy communication and healthy relating means, yes, I am responsible for my own feelings, my own core wounds, but I'm also allowed to share with you what my needs are. Healthy relating means we take each other's needs and wounds into consideration. For example, I know for my husband, sensitivities that he has to things. What I do naturally, because we've shared about these things many times, is I know sensitivities that he has in certain areas of his life, and I know to just avoid those things or to look out for those things or to have his back in those areas if something's going to come up for him and vice versa. That's because we've shared those things with one another. So what ends up happening is, when we can communicate and share, we can support each other better. It doesn't mean that just because someone has a sensitivity, I'm never going to support them and care about them and they can only deal with that on their own. That's not how it works. When we love, when we bond, when we attach, we can look out for those things in others. We can be there for them in certain ways. And at the same time, we can know that ultimately we each have to fix any internal core wounds. Only we can do that reprogramming. But it doesn't mean that if someone has a wound of feeling rejected, for example, that I'm not going to communicate something that's like constructive feedback for the relationship. I might start off by saying, "Hey, I feel like we're in a great place overall. I really care about you. I want to share something with you," and sort of preface it so that it's better received by someone because we understand them. Healthy interdependence means, yes, we are responsible for our own feelings and needs, but we can also communicate them to others and have them be considerate of us at the same time. Dismissive avoidants tend to be really polarized in the fact that they think that we don't do that, we don't even need that from relationships. And again, this sounds like it's mean that someone would even think that, but the reality is this is what was modeled to dismissive avoidance. This was their trauma. This is how they were taught to relate to other people because they were given this type of modeling and connection from their parents or caregivers growing up. Furthermore, we often talk about how dismissive avoidance breadcrumb in relationships. They were breadcrumbed in their childhood. That's how they know how to love. So, number 8, they tend to really want a relationship that is simple, harmonious, and low effort. And again, this starts to heal and change as they become more and more securely attached. But they tend to want to avoid all the conflict, drama, pain, struggle, all that kind of stuff, because they don't know how to work through conflict because it hasn't been modeled to them. So, if you imagine that you're programming your subconscious mind's lens that it sees and interacts with the world through, if you believe that your programming says, "I can't work through conflict. Really opening up is bad and shameful and weak. And I don't want to feel my feelings under any circumstances because I've done that as a child and that didn't go well for me." Then of course you want a relationship that's low effort because you need to relate without dealing with all that stuff. So it has to be simple and easy. Again, these things change as dismissive avoidants learn to become more secure, really attached. They stop fearing those things and they learn healthy strategies to deal with conflict, to work through it. Dismissive avoidants often have a natural programming that translates into their relationships. As a result, they might find flaws in their partners as a subconscious strategy for self-protection. This leads us to number 9. Dismissive avoidants may suddenly lose feelings in relationships. What happens is dismissive avoidants are always operating in their feelings minus their fears. When there's low attachment, like in the dating stage or the early days of a relationship, those fears don't really get activated. The more there is attachment, our subconscious mind goes, "Okay, what do I know about attachment? Oh, the last time I really attached this vulnerably." We tend to use our adult romantic relationships to replace our caregiver relationships with our parents. So, the subconscious mind, which is basically operating as a giant filing cabinet of information, says, "Oh, attachment. I'm attaching. I'm bonding. I'm opening up." As that relationship progresses, that turns into the dismissive avoidant going, "Oh my gosh, attachment is scary." So, the more attachment is there, the more dismissive avoidants are operating in their feelings, and then those fears start to rise up. It's almost like the subconscious opens the filing cabinet and goes, "What do we know about attachment? Oh my gosh, it's scary. Vulnerability doesn't feel good. Conflict feels really bad." And all those fears come up. So, dismissive avoidants are constantly in the feeling minus fear space. If those fears are too strong or high, if the dismissive avoidant has too many fears that are unresolved, it will lead them to a point where they end up losing feelings suddenly, finding flaws in their partner as a subconscious strategy to feel protected. They nitpick little things as a way to justify pushing the person away. Their subconscious mind basically feels all this stored fear and does what it can to create space and to push somebody away to stay safe, to be okay. This brings me to number 10. They can also struggle with this core belief, or rather, it's related to a core belief where they believe that they're not good enough, or the higher level belief is they're not capable of giving other people what they need. Often they think, I'm just not capable. I don't know how to do this stuff. You have to remember, if you have very low modeling for emotional connection and you haven't been taught consistently how to healthily emotionally relate to others and how to give and receive, and how to do a lot of these things that a lot of other attachment styles feel naturally come to them, then you're going to feel like it's an unknown. So, when people are like, why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? How could you forget about this thing? A lot of times, dismissive avoidance, and I've had countless conversations with dismissive avoidant clients over the years, have said things to me like, I just think I'm not cut out for relationships. I'm not wired for them. I just don't think I'm capable of this like other people are. This is just the meaning the mind will give to the situation when it doesn't know that there are solutions, when it doesn't know, hey, I can do a little exposure work on vulnerability. I can do a little reconditioning of my core wounds. And I can learn healthy communication tools to work through conflict. And if I remove these core wounds through reprogramming of weak, shameful, unsafe, I am not capable, I'm not good enough. These things, if you just do some reprogramming, which is pretty straightforward, and then learn healthy communication about your needs and how to work through conflict, then boom, relationships become so much easier. It's not that someone's not capable, it's that when they don't have the tools and they don't know what the tools would be, it's like an unknown, then it makes it really tricky. But I do want to say, it's absolutely possible to change, to become secure, to have healthy attached relationships. And those are some of the major signs you might be a dismissive avoidant. This can also be for partners of dismissive avoidance who are wondering if their partners are dismissive avoidants. And hopefully this makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, please check out some of our content. You can do it for free for 7 days using the link below. And please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching.